Welcome everybody. We're at one of the world's most important sites, one of the world's most important castles anyway, the Tower of London. Alan, you're the boss here.
I am indeed. I'm the Chief Elm Warder at the Tower of London. I have been now for 4 years. And although I've been here for a lot longer, I've been here for 18 years, but Chief Elm Warder for 4.
And what do the yeoman warders do?
Well, we traditionally guard and look after the Tower of London. That's our main focus. We also live here. There's 37 of us total, with our wives and families. About 120 people actually live in the tower.
How many years have the yeoman warders been guarding the tower?
Well, I would suggest that we've been doing that for at least since the White Tower was built in 1078.
So you're coming up to your 1000th anniversary.
Indeed we are, yes.
Brilliant. There's not many offices in the world that you can say that about.
Indeed. One of the oldest bodies, yes.
You're one of the oldest bodies in the world, are you?
Yes, indeed.
Now, we've got a beautiful morning here. We've got, I don't know if you want to look that way, everybody, but you can see HMS Belfast, which is a British cruiser from World War II. It was at D-Day. We've got people coming to work here. No, come on in, no problem. And this is, where are we now? Just talk about where we are now. This looks like a big moat to me.
Well, indeed it is. Behind me is the moat, which is the third line of defence, if you like. When the tower was first built, it had the inner wall built in 1220 and then the outer wall in 1280, which is literally over on my left. And the moat was then built there was a dry moat, and it's been there for a number of years. But we're actually on the causeway, and the tower on my right here is the middle tower, which was really sited right in the middle of the moat, and the water went all the way around it. So there would have been a drawbridge to the Byward Tower over on my left, and right at the top of the Byward Tower is exactly where I live. So that's my house.
Oh, look up, everyone!
That's where I'm very fortunate to be able to have a wonderful view down the River Thames. So the drawbridge would have gone up against the face of the Byward Tower, and the Byward Tower is traditionally where the password was handed and mentioned and said, and it really traditionally happens nowadays at about 3 o'clock. We hand over the password.
Portcullis up there.
You've got the portcullis, which dates 1326, and of course the three murder holes.
Or incendiaries or weapons or just nasty things on the people below.
Indeed. And then coming through, we're onto the lane, Water Lane, which is right ahead of us, and on the right-hand side is the Sally Port, which traditionally is where Queen Anne Boleyn was met by Henry VIII. There he made a nice promise to look after her for the rest of her life, which was true.
Yeah, it's true.
A brief life, yes, indeed, yes. So for 3 years anyway. And of course Water Lane was so cool because up until the outer wall was built, which is over on my right here, the water from the River Thames came right up to the inner wall over on my left. And before that was built, the inner wall was built in 1220, the water went right the way through and up to the White Tower, which is, of course, the first tower that was built.
Yeah, so it has changed a lot, hasn't it?
Indeed,
so
it has.
It's hard to visualise what it's like, but it was protected by water features in a way that it isn't anymore.
Absolutely. And the road here that we're standing on now, or walking down, would have been a lot lower. So 10 to 15 feet down, much lower down.
So these walls would have been so imposing, wouldn't
absolutely.
they?
They're about 90 feet tall in the inner wall, on the inner wall, and they're about 25 foot thick on the outer wall. So quite an imposing building.
And the thing I always think is interesting about the Tower of London is it's not just a military fortification. It's a head seat of government. It's a palace. It's a party place for the royal family. I mean, it's everything, isn't it?
Indeed, it has been everything. The Royal Mint was here up until 1810, so all the coins of the realm were minted inside. It's been a royal menagerie, and that was where all the exotic beasts were brought over as gifts to the monarchs. It's been, as you say, a fortress. It's been home for kings and queens for well over 500 years. So yes, it's had multiple tasks for the buildings, certainly.
Where are we going now?
Well, we're coming into the medieval palace, which was built over the top of the Traitor's Gate. Traitor's Gate originally was known as Watergate, and it's where all the stores and provisions were brought in via the waterways. It was much easier to do so because obviously the Tower of London in its heyday was a thriving community. There was lots of people living in and around it, so you needed the stores and provisions. But it was also protected them, because if you try and bring them through the crowded streets of London, then you would have probably encouraged them to have been stolen. So bring them along the river, bring them inside, And over the top is the medieval palaces, as I said.
So it's amazing. The Tower of London was designed to almost be sort of even if the whole country had risen up against, you've got the river, you've got the artery, you can get supplies in, you've got these walls and moats, you could be happy here no matter what happened elsewhere.
Well, indeed you could. And I think the idea, of course, of the White Tower is to be really imposing. And the Tower of London, it just grew and grew and grew in size. It's actually over 18 acres in total. So it must have been huge impact on the people living in and around.
Yeah.
So,
and there was a permanent, real military presence here. I mean, there still is a military presence
yes,
here,
indeed.
but it was from what? From the tents of the Norman conquest, right, including the Second World War, right up to nearly 1,000 years of important military presence here.
Absolutely, and very very important as well, because obviously, certainly when the White Tower was built, you needed to have this degree of security. It was a home it was a palace. It was a home for William the Conqueror, although unfortunately he didn't get to live in it. It wasn't completed by the time of his death. But for 500 years, all of our kings and queens actually lived here. So you would have had all of this protection essentially from a military garrison here, but also the yeoman warders. It would have been the king's or queen's personal bodyguards.
And are you still the Queen's personal bodyguard?
We are yeoman warders for Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London, yeoman of the guard in extraordinary. So we can do sort of both jobs, although technically only when she comes here do we do that aspect of it.
And why are you called beefeaters? What's the word beefeaters?
Well, beefeaters is an interesting concept, really, because it's just a nickname, and nobody really knows where it's come from. Possibly, in the old days, maybe part of our salary was paid with beer, with beef. Beer, of course, was probably the most common drink. Ale. You wouldn't drink water. It would do you lots of damage. It would kill you. But
terrible stuff.
but beef, of course, was too expensive for most people. And of course, being here at the Tower, we had access to the monarchs and so on, and so they used to give us beef. And when we wandered through the crowded streets of London in what is our splendid red and gold uniforms, ones we wear today only on ceremonial occasions, but people would have seen us walking through there and been quite jealous of us. We were well paid, well fed, well clothed, a nice lifestyle, being quite jealous. And they'd probably call us those beef eaters, so we're not really sure.
So
but
we're in the medieval palace. So who would have lived in here?
This is initially Edward I was here, Edward Longshanks, and also Henry III. So Henry III, then Edward. It's actually quite an interesting building, but this was also home to one of the officers that used to work here up until about the 1970s, within mid-70s, it was used. There's an old safe through the old door, through the other room. And so he lived here, so it wasn't actually open to the public. And one of the great things that we're trying to do here at the Tower is to open up as many of these buildings as possible.
I bet there's so many little nooks and crannies that you
Oh, indeed. I mean, just looking at the stonework, the way that the herringbone brickwork has been.
What period is that? I've never
Again, Tudor. This is from a Tudor period where the tower was extended, and it's pretty much like every house that you nowadays that you go into. If you buy a house, you probably change the decor to suit yourself, rather than. And this what's happened. It's evolved over the many years. And this particular room, the bedchamber.
It's all been done up now. Look at that, very nice.
So done in the style we think as it would have been. So castles, generally speaking, people think the castles were very damp, windy, cold, hot, old places, but actually they were quite lavishly decorated. They had a nice roaring fire, so it would have been quite cosy. But again, because of the windows and so on, it would have been quite drafty at times as well. So many people tended to go and find more palatial places to live after a while. So
what
indeed.
period is this done up to, do you think? This is Henry III, is it?
Yes, Henry III, and yeah. And of course, through the wee doorway there's a small oratory. In most places, within the castle walls, you would have had a lovely a place to go and pray, the small oratory.
Where next?
Well, we're going to take you across Selvin's Bridge, which links the medieval palace with the Wakefield Tower. So there's one or two interesting obstacles in the way of spiral staircases.
I suppose we have to imagine that the Tower of London was just constantly being built and improved and knocked down and changed. I mean, all of these must just be different periods jumbled together.
It is indeed, yeah, very much so. And if you can imagine that when the tower was first built, the Great White Tower, which we'll see shortly, but it's evolved over those many hundreds of years. It's around about 250 years before the tower got to the extent that it is now. But we are constantly moving, or I say moving, but we're constantly preserving and protecting the buildings now, obviously because of the age. This is Henry III's throne room. This is where he would have met dignitaries coming up
Simon de Montfort asking him for a parliament and causing trouble.
And of course,
it's happened in this room.
Yes, indeed. And of course, in this oratory here, this small prayer room is where traditionally Henry VI was murdered on the 21st of May, 1471, whilst at prayer.
Let's go and have a look in here, everybody. This is where Henry VI, the very sad, mentally ill son of Henry V, whose reign saw civil war and the loss of France. This is where he was finally killed. Well, that is extraordinary.
This is also, I mean, we do lots of ceremonies here, and one of the ceremonies that we do, because he founded Eton College and King's College, Cambridge. So on the anniversary of his death each year, we have representatives from those colleges who come here to place lilies and roses onto the spot where he died. So we process up through the spiral staircase over on my right. We come in and we form up here. We have a small service, and the lilies and roses are placed onto the spot there where he died. They remain there for one day. The keeper of the jewels comes then the following day to take them away and burn them.
We have the most extraordinary continuity in our history.
We do, absolutely.
Well, people, please tell me on Twitter and Facebook if there's anywhere else in the world that has those traditions that remain unbroken.
Absolutely, and it's so important that we maintain these traditions, in my view. So we're going through now, again, up another spiral staircase. This is the back entrance, and actually below the spiral staircase down to my right there, and through the door, just out to the right-hand side, there's a well. We have two wells in the Tower of London. Indeed, if you're trying to protect yourself, you need water, especially if there's going to be a great siege to prevent you from getting in and out of the tower.
Have there ever been sieges of the tower?
No, it's been too big. In most cases, it's the cost. If you're going to, just imagine the size of the army you'll need to completely cover and keep everybody inside in the size of this tower.
There was some trouble during the Peasants' Revolt, though, wasn't there?
There was in 1381. Yes, the Peasants' Revolt. But the thing was it was the poll tax. It was there was a Simon Sudbury was trying to introduce a poll tax, and of course the peasants didn't like that. And he was found in the Great White Tower. And
we should talk about here's the White Tower. That's the heart of the tower.
That is indeed, yes. Well, he was found in there at prayer. Of course, the young warders themselves didn't like the idea of paying the poll tax, so they left all the gates open.
Oh, I see.
So that's how they were able to get hold of him. And they take him out through. You can probably just see the gherkin up on the top of the hill there. And it's just in that direction is where the execution site was, outside of the tower.
So
and that's
killed
where
the Archbishop Canterbury, dragged him out.
Dragged him out there, and
let's
that's
talk
where.
about the White Tower. I mean, that is one of the most important. Well, it's 950 years old almost. It is a stunning square keep from the Norman period, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. Well, it stands about 90 feet tall. There are the walls are about 15 foot thick at the base. They taper to 11 foot thick at the top. I'm going in feet here.
That's all right.
Been old-fashioned. There's 4 turrets. There's 3 square ones, and 2 of which we can see on the southern side now, facing the River Thames. They are, and then 2 further back on the right-hand side, the north-eastern corner, is a round tower and a round turret, and that's where the Royal Observatory was housed before it was moved to Greenwich in the 17th century.
Everything was here.
But on the tops of those turrets, you can probably just make out the weather vane, and on that is the royal standard. It denotes that this is still, in fact, a royal palace, although no longer used as a royal residence. But as I said earlier, for well over 500 years, all of our kings and queens lived here. There's 4 floors in there now. There's 4 levels, and the one that's slightly below ground level was the site of the Tower Dungeons, and it's there where the rack was placed, and people,
Really?
indeed. So that.
Would the royal family been able to hear the screams of people?
Well, that's a very good question. One would never know. But they're very, very thick walls, and we do sometimes get muffled screams nowadays.
Oh, really?
Well, there's a gift shop there now, but no, it would have been quite interesting actually, because it was done out of sight, but it was the reputation more so than anything else of the tower. If you wanted to extract information, in the case of Guy Fawkes, let's say, shall we, in 1605, when he tried to blow up the House of Parliament, he was brought here and he wouldn't disclose his fellow conspirators. And so a warrant was sought from James I to carry out torture. But it wasn't actually called torture, it was put to the question.
Put to the question.
Put to the question. And of course, once the warrant was issued, then that's when the torture took place. There was only 48 of them that we know of. So there wasn't as many as people think. It was, as I say, the tower's reputation that did most of the damage.
I bet people talked as soon as they were brought in.
Well, indeed, and in the same way that Guido Fawkes, he had to sign this document to say that this information wasn't coerced from. So he wasn't coerced in giving this information, and then he had to sign again afterwards. So and we have a copy of the two. Well, we do have the 2 copies. Yes, indeed. So this is the Lanthorn Tower, and we're going through the Upper Lanthorn Tower. All towers were named for some reason or another, and the Lanthorn Tower, which again, if we overlooking the River Thames here, on the top of the tower, we would have had any ships of the line that came into the Pool of London, and generally speaking, from Tower Bridge over on my left to London Bridge over on my right, we consider to be the Pool of London.
Because when this castle was built, that bridge wasn't there.
Exactly.
And the furthest downstream bridge on the River Thames was London Bridge. Which is
indeed,
right. Okay,
absolutely.
So big ships come up.
Indeed, and they had to pay a tax to the Constable of the Tower, and if they didn't pay that, one of the young warders have been up on the Lanthorn Tower waving a lantern to tell the ship's captain it's come time to pay your dues. and that's hence the name of the Lanthorn Tower. And over on, to the left here and to my front is the Cradle Tower. As I said earlier, when the tower was very, very busy, there was lots going on. There was lots of stores and provisions coming in through Traitors' Gate. It got too congested, so they opened up another area with the Cradle Tower to assist in bringing in those stores and provisions. Hence, and there used to be a little jib on the other side, if you like, where it used to take all the stores off, and that's why it's called the Cradle Tower.
The river. I think it's so important. The river is such an important feature of the tower, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The artery of the tower, everything.
Well, indeed.
The king would travel to Westminster, would he?
Indeed. Indeed. And of course, it played a huge part because prior to the tower being built on it, it's partly the reason why William the Conqueror decided to place it where it was, because it was on the site of an old Roman fort previous. So it played an awfully important part of the tower's history.
William the Conqueror invades England, 1066, takes over. He must have been a bit insecure about his conquest.
Indeed he was. Well, the Saxons didn't really take kindly to Norman domination, and so there was a lot of fighting going on around and about. And as such, he decided to have a series of castles built surrounding London. And of course, this is where he chose to build the Great White Tower. It took about 20 years to do. So from it started in 1078, and it was completed in 1098. And now we're in the Upper Salt Tower, and salt. This is where they stored saltpeter.
Oh,
yes, indeed, a very volatile substance.
So this is far away from the royal family
as possibly can get. Yes, absolutely. So, but it's also reputed to be one of the most haunted of towers, shall we say? We do have some really daft people sometimes. They love to come and do some raise money for charities and things, you know. And so they come and do sleepovers in here. And I say daft because I wouldn't do it.
Oh, really? You wouldn't do it? You've been
No. I've been a number of years. But no, it's all done in a very good cause. But it's reputed that that animals don't like coming in here. They sort of shirk away from coming in.
Ooh,
so
that's scary. You've said it shiver down my spine now.
most of the
Graffiti, sort of carvings on the
Yes,
walls.
indeed.
These are prisoners or people?
Indeed, there were. Yes, we have over 90 inscriptions in the tower. The main tower, which is the Beauchamp Tower, has the most, and they date over 450 years old. Not a lot to do here if you were held prisoner here. It's house arrest more so than anything, because you had to be somebody really important to be a prisoner in the Tower of London. Yeah. It wasn't just just a common criminal's prison. So not a great deal to do, so that you start carving on the wall, and then of course, as somebody else then was held prisoner here, they thought, well, I'm going to make mine more elaborate and so on. So we've got some wonderful carvings in here.
Great. Alan, what a beautiful morning. Looking at these, a whole range of buildings. They look like 18th century medieval buildings here, a whole mixture, and then the White Tower there. Unbelievable.
Indeed, there's a whole mishmash of buildings here, but the spectacle really is the Queen's House down in the corner. Tudor building, which survived the Great Fire of London, of course, because most of the buildings then were destroyed because there was no natural fire break. We had the moat, water in the moat at the time, so it was very, very well protected.
Crowded with well-to-do refugees.
Indeed, yes. So built in 1540, now home nowadays to the resident or the residents of the Constable of the Tower, who's appointed by Her Majesty. It's a marvellous building. It's gorgeous inside. And it's been in that, as I say, in that area since about 1540.
So let's look away from me, everybody. That's the white and timber frame building.
The buildings on either side are generally used. They're sort of Georgian, Edwardian, and so on. They're very different styles, and so, as you see. But they're home nowadays to the Yeoman Warders that live here. So many of them are still actually being used as accommodation. But 4 and 5 Tower Green, reputedly where Lady Jane Grey was held prior to her execution, and around to the right, the Beauchamp Tower, which was the state prison. It would have been the one that most people would have been sent to if it were vacant. So, and then, of course, we have the chapel behind, and right in front of the chapel is the site of the execution.
This is where people were beheaded, but not many people were executed here, were they?
No, only 6 really, and the first was Anne Boleyn in 1536, electing to be executed with the French method of execution, which in those days was a sword, a heavy double-handed, double-edged sword. Not liking the idea of being executed with a block and axe, because it's rather a hit and miss affair, if you pardon the pun, because most of the time it's a gory thing to do, as you can probably imagine, and most of the executioners were plied with some sort of alcohol to help them through that process, and so some of the beheadings were quite gruesome. You know, it took more than one attempt to get the head severed, so she didn't like that idea. And so therefore a French executioner was brought over and dispatched the head very, very efficiently. And of course, then that was in 1536. In 1542, it was the turn of Henry VIII's fifth wife, Catherine, I've forgotten her name now.
Which one would it be?
Catherine Howard.
Yeah.
Catherine Howard. And that was in 1542. But it was quite a peculiar affair, because there was 2 executions on the same day. It was her lady-in-waiting, Jane Boleyn, who was also executed. She knew of her queen's indiscretions, and as such didn't pass the information to the king. So she was tried and convicted of misprision of treason.
I see.
Over on the left, of course, we have the doctor's house and the chaplain's house. And the resident, as I say, I was talking about the residences of the Queen's House earlier. Well, there is the resident going off, General the Lord Dannet, as he's making his way off to work this morning. So the execution that took place here, you can imagine that there were a lot of followers for these individuals, and so in order to prevent them from being martyrs, or being made martyrs, they were buried in the Chapel Royal. And we can go and have a look at that if you like.
Let's do it.
So that's where they were buried, many of them. It was a private chapel, only very important invited guests were allowed to go in, so that tended to keep away all the various other followers. So the chapel, there's been a chapel on the site since about the year of 1110. It was pulled down in 1286, rebuilt in 1287.
So this current building dates till 1287.
Indeed, but there's also, excuse me, I'm going to take my hat off. But it was destroyed by fire in 1512, rebuilt in 1519 on the orders of King Henry VIII. So the windows, the arches on the left here, and the Spanish chestnut beams in the ceiling, these are all original Tudor architecture. But sadly, the chapel was allowed to fall into a state of disrepair, resulting in a visit from Queen Victoria in 1876. She was horrified at the state of the chapel, so she ordered a royal commission to be set up to fully restore the chapel back to its former glory. Well, work began by removing all the old furniture. They had to replace and install underground heating systems. And when they did that, they discovered buried inside the chapel over 1,500 human remains. 1,500? 1,500. These were the people either executed up on Tower Hill or outside on Tower Green. Many of them were unidentified because purely there was no markers on the grave sites to indicate who they were. Those that were, these markers were generally made of lead or lead pewter. We have 3 in the glass case there to the rear of the chapel. And this indicates the executions of the last 3 Scottish lords in the Second Jacobite Rebellion, 1746-47. And so these were made of, as you can see, they are starting to deteriorate somewhat, but of course from the time of discovery to burial there was quite a substantial amount of time.
1746 for following Bonnie Prince Charlie as he tried to take the throne, and that's why only the most recent ones have survived, really, I suppose.
Pretty much, yes, indeed. But fortunately there were 33 bodies that were formally identified, and their names are on the brass plaque here. And the most significant, I would suggest, is Anne Boleyn, who's buried at the altar. And
so it's like a roll call of the most
indeed
celebrated and unluckiest people in British history, the traitors of British history.
Well, as I said, Anne Boleyn was executed and then buried here, as was Catherine Howard and Lady Jane Grey, and they're buried at the altar. And if you look at the altar cross there, the altar table, just the left-hand side, you can probably just make out the diamond shapes there and the coat of arms. Well, the left-hand one is Anne Boleyn, and the one in the centre is Catherine Howard, so they're side by side. Lady Jane Grey, somewhere down here in the lower step near the white marble slab there.
What a thought.
So they're all buried in here. Those that were unidentified have been placed into 2 casks now, and they've been buried in the wall over on the right-hand side of the chapel. But interesting, this over here, we have the gravestone of Talbot Edwards. He, of course, was the keeper of the Jaws in 1671, when the one and only attempt by Thomas Blood to steal the crown jewels.
Oh my goodness!
Was
it a success or not?
No. Well, partially. I say no. It's partially. He got away with it as far as the wharf, and then he was actually being captured there and brought back in. So,
goodness for that.
So the chapel it's a glorious chapel. So it's pretty much Tudor in its construction, and over on the right hand side, as I look at, through the doorway, is the ancient crypt. So that's where the chapel would have been prior to this one being built in 1519. So.
Okay, where are we now?
So this is the Beauchamp Tower, and this would have been what we refer to as the state prison. So all the prisoners that were housed at the Tower of London, if this were vacant, this would be the first one that they would be brought to. It's in the inner wall, and the only entrance is this way, so it's been very well secure and guarded.
Who are some of the most famous prisoners who've been there?
Well, John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, was probably, and his family were housed here. Lord Guildford was, of course, married Lady Jane Grey, with the thought that
one of the most powerful families in the kingdom.
Indeed. It was, and of course, poor Lady Jane Grey, of course, was pretty much unwilling to become queen. The rightful heir to the throne was Mary. And so the family was brought here and placed into the Beauchamp Tower. And in here we have over 90 inscriptions dating over 450 years old. The significant ones are the less ornate, shall we say. Number 48, over here. And if you can see that,
Yeah.
Jane.
Oh no, look at that.
Very simple, Jane.
There is a who was almost Queen of England.
Indeed.
And their life here as a prisoner.
There is another one, number 85, over here, which is also Jane. There she is, exactly the same.
Oh, look at her carving her name. How old was she, do we know?
17 at the point of execution, 16 at the time she was brought here. But the significance, of course, is the Dudley crest here. So you can see how ornate that is.
So even as prisoners, they were proud of their family and their traditions.
Each one of the flowers and around signify one of the children. So you've got roses for Robert, or Ambrose rather, and then you've got acorns and so on, and then the gilly flowers for Lord Guildford.
So didn't they brought a professional, carver?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's probably, this one-upmanship all the time, isn't it? You think, well, I'll just make a little carving in here, but then someone else sees it and thinks, well, I can do better than that. So it's fabulous. It's absolutely a fascinating element of the Beauchamp Tower. So the state prison, you can see how very difficult to escape from. And invariably, another role for the yeoman warders, of course, was to look after those prisoners. So our wives would produce meals for them. So you had to be somebody fairly wealthy to become a prisoner at the Tower of London. You just couldn't, if you couldn't afford it, you didn't come here. That's for sure.
And when was the last prisoner held at the Tower?
Well, it's certainly around the 1941, sort of the Second World War, during that period. That's what the Tower was used as a I'm trying to think of the word, actually. It was used like as a clearing centre for spies, parachutists, submariners. If they were captured, they were brought here, they were assessed and then sent off somewhere else. But that sort of finished towards the latter part of 41. And of course, one of the most famous ones was Rudolf Hess, who was...
Hitler's former deputy.
That's right, he was brought here, but only for 4 days. But held... not in this building, but in the Bell Tower, which was adjacent to the Queen's house. The last person actually to be executed in the Tower of London, equally as in 41, Josef Jacobs, a German spy. So there were executions up to 1941, and not a lot of people actually realise that. But also, the last prisoner, if it's going to be a Trivial Pursuit question, that would be the Cray twins. Indeed, yeah. It's an interesting story actually, because the sergeant that was tasked to get them and bring them back to the regiment, they'd gone AWOL, absent without leave, during the conscription days, and so they were caught and they were subsequently being taken back to their unit. But unfortunately, they didn't have enough. It was going to be an overnight thing, so they couldn't do it. So they brought them here. They thought, well, being a military garrison inside, there would be a guard room could put them. Unfortunately, that was destroyed in the bombings during the Blitz. So, what do you do? Where do we put them? Well, they actually put them either side of the clock. Oh dear, excuse me. They put me either side of the clock, and they were. I can't do. Sorry. Oh dear, I don't know what happened there. So they were brought here, they were put either side of the clock. There's 2 towers, one in each side, held there overnight. And additionally to that story, apparently, because we actually saw spoke to the sergeant, who's on a bit now, but a number of years ago, and he was telling us about the story. And the dilemma that he had, because come the morning, their mother had come to say goodbye. And they wanted to say goodbye, but they were handcuffed and everything else. They said, can you let us go and say goodbye to Mum? He said, well, if I did that, they may run off and I'll be in trouble. But if I don't do that, being the Cray twins, being their reputation, if I don't do that, when they come out, they'll come and find me and do me in. So he did let them go to go and say hello, or say farewell to Mum, and apparently they were going to run. But Mother persuaded them to just to go back and finish their time. So, a lovely story.
Well, Alan, so many lovely stories here. Thank you very much for showing me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Ben, you're in charge of the White Tower.
I am indeed, yep.
Thank you very much for this. This is the heart of the Tower of London.
Indeed, the original Norman fortress.
So it was first built, this was it. There was no outer walls or anything like that.
Indeed, this is the reason it's called the Tower of London, this tower.
It's a big square tower. Everyone look up now because you get the most extraordinary view. It's a beautiful day. And this is the entrance. Why are we up on the sort of, well, second floor virtually?
Indeed, we're about 6.5 metres off the ground. This wooden staircase would have been fairly similar to the ones the Normans would have built in around the year 1100. The idea being that if you're down the bottom and I don't want you to come in, I can set fire to this and then you've got 6 metres to climb to get in.
So even though it's a royal palace, but it was designed to be defended. I mean, they were assuming almost.
Indeed, when William the Conqueror came to London, he didn't exactly get the most welcoming of receptions. And there's stories that outside Westminster Abbey, cheering crowds were set upon by his soldiers as he thought they were attacking him. So he was quite nervous at securing his newfound sort of country.
Right, so here we are. We're inside the White Tower now. What's in here today?
So currently the White Tower houses the Line of Kings exhibition. That's been here at the Tower since around the late 1600s, and it moved here in 1883.
And that's the suits of armour and everything that we can just see coming up there.
Indeed. Originally it would have gone right from William the Conqueror through to George II. Today we start the line off with Henry VIII, who you can probably see just down the end there.
That's Henry VIII. Well, that's his armour. That's extraordinary. So we still have all the armour of the kings and queens of England. Well, I suppose not many for the queens.
No, not too many for the queens.
It's wonderful. And it's a great privilege to be here before it opens. So there's the glass.
Indeed.
So there's Henry VIII.
Indeed. So this is.
He was a big jouster, wasn't he?
He certainly was. And then in the second case, as you can see, his a garniture set built for Henry in around 1540.
So do you see in Henry's armour that his waistline slowly gets let out?
If you look to the profile of this armour, you can see that he was a slightly larger gentleman.
But this was all palace. I mean, initially this building would have been where the kings and queens and their family would have lived.
Indeed. The first royal to have used this would have been William Rufus, William the Conqueror's son. And we think that the royal apartments probably would have been on the floor just above, just when we go upstairs to the chapel, I'll point out. But this certainly would have had maybe an administrative function, maybe the Constable of the Tower stayed in this part.
Wow. This armour is amazing.
Some spectacular examples, some Maximilian armours and some slightly later ones as well.
Oh, that's Charles the First. It was a boy, is it?
Indeed, and we think Charles I and Charles II as well.
That's very sweet. He used his dad's armour.
Recycling in action, as they say.
Yeah. They were. Did they grow much bigger than that?
We think they grow a little bit bigger, but they certainly weren't the tallest of people. Unlike this gentleman here.
Who's this monster?
It's been attributed to a few people, possibly John of Gaunt. We think it might have been an armourer's test piece, or maybe something to show off in your hallway.
Oh, just to show off. Okay. I would not have enjoyed meeting on the battlefield. Mind boggles. Right, so where are we off to now?
So if we head upstairs, we'll go upstairs to the first floor.
Okay, so we're on the second floor of the keep now.
Indeed. So we think this room probably would have been the royal apartment, so probably would have been a partition wall sectioning part of it off. And we think that because of the number of toilets and obviously the royal chapel just down the end.
There's some toilets up there. That's very nice.
So if we head into the larger of the garde-robes, it's just here by the great stairs.
Eastern sun streaming. So this is a toilet. It's a royal medieval toilet, everybody.
A throne, if you like.
Oh yeah, look at that. And that would have just emptied down to the outside?
Mm-hmm. Down into the cesspit, and then up until the 1870s into the moat.
There you go, everybody. Look down, you can see it would have gone down, your business would have gone down there, into the moat. So the moat was not for drinking?
Certainly not, no. Took a number of times to dig and wasn't particularly pleasant at any one point, apparently.
Good for fertilizer. Wonderful. Okay, so this is, it's just so exciting to be. And do we have any sense of how old, look away from me, everyone, straight in front of me now. Do you have any sense of how old these columns are that are holding up the roof?
So these were put in the 1490s, because originally would have been on the top floor of the building where we're standing now. They needed some extra storage in the 1490s, so they installed another floor, and they had to support it with these beams.
So they're quite young, really, 1490s.
Oh, relatively, yeah. A baby compared to the rest of the building. Due to the notches previously in the Victorian area, they would tell you that they were ship's masts.
Oh, okay.
But we think they were used for shelving. less glamorous.
What's through here? St John's Chapel.
Indeed, this is the Chapel of St John the Evangelist.
Extraordinary place. So, what is this? Is Norman? This dates all the way back to the early castle.
Indeed, the first monarch to have worshipped here would, as I said earlier, would have been William Rufus. Unfortunately, William the Conqueror never lived to see it completed, but it is one of the finest surviving examples of Norman or Romanesque architecture.
It is so beautiful. And is it still a consecrated chapel?
Indeed, it's one of the oldest working chapels in the United Kingdom. We still have services the first Sunday of every month.
Wow. So this is where the court would have gathered.
Indeed. This is where Simon Sadbury was dragged out kicking and screaming during the Peasants' Revolt.
Oh, really? The Archbishop of Canterbury was taken out of here during the Peasants' Revolt?
So after the peasants had sacked the royal apartments where we've just been, they would have dragged him out through this doorway, down the main stairs and out onto Tower Hill. Although no one remembers Robert Hales, the Lord Treasurer.
He got killed as well?
Indeed, he didn't have quite the glamorous ending.
Where are we heading now?
So we'll head down the Great Stair and out of the building.
Great stuff, thank you. How many visitors do you, obviously people are cleaning now, it's before it opens. How
Indeed.
many visitors do you get a year?
We get around 3 to 4 million visitors per year.
It's a 4 million visitors a year. And how you get it all through. There we go. Oh yeah. Sorry.
That's all right.
Coming through. And so that spiral staircase we've just gone on, how old is that?
That's the original staircase. That would have been the only way up to the upper floors of the building
That is,
originally.
You know, over 900 years old.
So we'll just head out this way.